Have you ever felt like a ghost in the crowd, surrounded by people, but carrying the sensation of being absolutely invisible? Have you ever tried to express what you feel and saw in the other person's gaze only emptiness, as if your words were lost in the wind? Perhaps you are one of those sensitive souls who perceive the world in details so subtle that they don't fit into daily rush. You feel the pain of others, the weight of silences, the gestures that didn't happen, the words that stayed stuck in the throat. And at the same time, you realize that no one seems to notice when you yourself are on the edge of the abyss. It's as if your pain were too uncomfortable to be seen, something that others prefer to ignore. And then, what do? You remain silent. You hide. You learn to silence the pain, to put a smile on your face so as not to bother anyone, to swallow sadness as if it were bitter saliva. You begin to believe that the problem lies in you, that your sensitivity is a flaw, a piece out of place. Little by little, your light begins to fade. But what if I told you that this invisibility is not a cruel accident, but part of a deeper process? That the silence around you hides a hidden calling? Jung reminds us that individuation, the path of becoming whole, frequently begins with a period of darkness, of feeling apart, as if we were in exile. Invisibility, then, is not just a punishment. It is the beginning of a secret alchemy, where the soul is placed in fire so that something new can be born. Your pain is legitimate, and perhaps it is asking to be felt to the end, to open space for something that has not yet been seen. Have you ever wondered what lies behind this sensation of being invisible? What does the silence of others want to say? Could it be that, behind this pain, there exists a light not yet recognized? Being sensitive is, often, perceiving what is hidden, the silences, the unsaid, the gestures that carry more than they seem. But, curiously, the world rarely welcomes this light. What in you is subtle perception, refined intuition, silent empathy, is often seen as exaggeration, drama, weakness. The modern world, noisy and superficial, has difficulty accepting what is deep and silent. And thus, your light is confused with shadow. You become too much for those who live on the surface. Too intense, too deep, too sensitive. This creates a painful conflict. You feel so much, perceive so much, but need to hide so as not to be judged, so as not to be excluded. Gradually, you begin to doubt yourself. Am I exaggerating? Am I really too much? This doubt acts like a subtle poison, extinguishing your light little by little, until you yourself begin to believe that your sensitivity is a defect, and not a gift. But what if the problem is not you being too much, but rather the world being too little? What if your light seems like shadow, because the collective gaze has not yet learned to see the invisible? Perhaps it's necessary to change focus. Instead of trying to diminish your light to fit in the world, cultivate the courage to be light, even if it blinds some gazes. And when the weight seems unbearable, you try to explain. You speak of the sadness that arises without reason, of the fatigue of hearing too much, of the discomfort with rude words or with the heavy energy of an environment. But from the other side, you hear responses that sound like walls. You think too much? That's all in your head? You don't need to exaggerate? And then you remain silent. You learn that perhaps it's better not to say anything, because explaining the pain of feeling deeply to those who live on the surface is like trying to describe the taste of honey to someone who has never tasted sweetness. And what happens? The weight accumulates. Each emotion you feel from others, the unspoken anger, the disguised sadness, the hidden fear, stays inside you, as if your soul were an invisible container, a vessel that holds what the world doesn't want to hold. This is not rare for those who carry the gift of sensitivity. In Jungian psychology, we can say that you connect with the collective unconscious, that field of human emotions where humanity's pains and dreams are stored. Sensitive people, often without realizing it, function as antennas that capture these waves, and therefore end up carrying pains that aren't even theirs. This intensity is not a defect, but it's necessary to recognize. It weighs. Like someone walking through a minefield, each step in the world can be a challenge, because everything seems to affect more, hurt more. Even the simple act of entering a crowded environment can generate suffocation, as if you carried not only your own anxiety, but also that of everyone present. It's an invisible burden, and the invisible, as we know, tends to be ignored. Therefore, many sensitive people end up isolating themselves. They learn to smile to disguise the discomfort, to say, everything's fine, while carrying the weight of an entire world. But this mask creates an abyss. The pain of not being understood joins the pain of not being able to share what one feels. And thus the burden becomes unbearable, not only because of the weight itself, but because of the silence around it. Have you also felt this way? Carrying a weight that is not only yours, suffocated by emotions without voice? And could it be that, behind this burden, there exists a key to something greater? There exists a peculiar loneliness that accompanies the sensitive. Not the loneliness of being alone, but of being surrounded by people without feeling truly seen. You can be among voices, smiles, casual encounters, and still carry an emptiness in your chest. Conversations get lost in trivialities. The weather, TV, work. You listen, respond, even laugh. But deep down, you desire something that rarely happens, a conversation that speaks of the pain of existing, of unconfessed fears, of the secret beauty of an ancient tree, or of the thrill of a song that touches the soul. Sensitive people live between two worlds: the external, with its demands and expectations, and the internal, where everything is felt in depth. But this inner world, for many, is invisible. You observe gestures that no one notices, feel the climate of an environment, perceive when someone is sad, even if they say, everything's fine. How to share this without seeming exaggerated? How to explain a pain that others don't even perceive? Gradually, this sensitivity transforms into exile. You distance yourself without wanting to, like a foreigner in a land of noise and haste, while what you seek is silence and meaning. Sometimes you try to adapt. You laugh at jokes, ignore disguised aggressiveness, say, no problem when everything in you screams. But there's a price. Each time you remain silent to be accepted, something inside you fades. Jung said that the process of individuation, the path of becoming whole, requires moments of isolation. The soul needs silence to hear its own voice, but the risk is great. Isolation can transform into bitterness, into a sensation of abandonment, into discouragement. The question that remains is, how to live with this intensity without getting lost in loneliness? How to transform the world's silence into a fertile space, and not into an abyss that devours? Perhaps the path is not to flee from loneliness, but to inhabit it as a sanctuary. Perhaps isolation is in fact an inner temple, where sensitivity is not a curse, but a bridge to something greater. If you observe your pain with attention, it might resemble an invisible heat, something that burns in silence. The loneliness, the sadness, the feeling of non-belonging might not be just weights to carry, but part of a hidden process, an inner furnace where something new is being gestated. In alchemy, the ancients spoke of the hermetic vessel, a closed container where elements were dissolved, heated, purified, until a new essence emerged. Jung saw in this image a metaphor for the human soul, the secret fire of experience that transforms raw matter, pains, fears, wounds, into something more subtle, more true. Perhaps your soul is also in this invisible vessel. Each tear, each silence endured, each sensation of non-belonging is like an ingredient thrown into the fire of transformation. The paradox is cruel. The heat of this process is felt as suffering, and the world, by not understanding, only increases this pain. Have you ever felt as if you were cooking inside, dissolving certainties, melting illusions without knowing what would come next? This is the path of solvet coagula. Dissolve the old, allow pain to manifest without censorship, to then let something new, more true, form from the ashes. The alchemical vessel is the space where the soul is heated, where each pain can also be an invitation to transform weight into light, wound into wisdom. But courage is needed. In the middle of this process, everything seems meaningless. Pain weighs, loneliness tightens, the desire to give up is real. It's like being inside a furnace without knowing what will be forged. And, however, something greater might be happening. Something that will only be understood when the transformation is complete. The question is, can you endure the heat? Allow the old to dissolve, even without knowing what will come next. And perhaps, in the middle of this fire, you have already noticed. The world seems increasingly noisy. Voices overlap. News shouts. Social networks accelerate without pause. And in this whirlwind, sensitivity seems like an even greater burden. But perhaps it is, in fact, a silent portal to something that few can access. The ancients knew this. Jung knew. Deep sensitivity, when not denied, is a door to the invisible, to what is beyond the eyes, beyond words. Being sensitive is perceiving what is not said, capturing what is hidden, listening to the most subtle vibrations. It's feeling that there is something beyond the apparent, like a distant music that only you hear, or the silent presence that reveals itself in the touch of a leaf in the wind. This is not fragile imagination. It's refined perception, a listening of the soul that connects you to something greater. The invisible field where symbols, archetypes, the mysteries of existence live. Being sensitive is carrying a rare listening, a perception that surpasses the obvious. But this connection has a price. The world, in its haste, rarely values this listening. When you try to speak about what you perceive, about the invisible connections you feel, you are often labeled as exaggerated, too mystical, or simply too sensitive. What could be a bridge to the sacred ends up becoming a solitary burden. Therefore, many sensitive people withdraw, thinking that their gift is an error, an adaptation failure. But Carl Jung invites us to look from another angle. What you feel might be a calling to a spiritual path. Not a path full of dogmas, but an intimate journey of connection with life's mystery. The silence that the world doesn't understand might be, in fact, the space where the invisible speaks, where symbols reveal themselves, where dreams whisper, where the soul learns to hear what reason doesn't reach. Being sensitive, then, is being guardian of the invisible. It's feeling what no one feels, listening to what no one listens to, seeing what no one wants to see. It's being a channel for beauty, the subtle, the mystery. But, for this, it's necessary to accept silence as teacher, and loneliness as sacred company. Can you open space for this silence? Could you welcome your sensitivity as a calling and not as a weight? Sensitivity is a paradox. What hurts most in you, what seems to be your weakness, might be the meeting point with the sacred. Have you felt this? As if the pain that no one sees, the open wound that burns in silence, were also the space where something greater tries to be born? Jung said that every wound carries a possibility of transformation. Perhaps, for the sensitive, this wound is the point of contact with something greater, that which connects us to the soul of the world. When you feel too much, when you carry the pain of others, when you cry for an injustice you didn't live, you become, without realizing it, a link between the visible and invisible world. Your wound is an opening, a tear in the fabric of common reality through which mystery passes. Think of figures like Christ, carrying the weight of the world, or the Bodhisattva, who chooses to remain on earth to alleviate others' suffering. They are not unreachable. They are living symbols of the experience of those who feel too much. Pain as portal to compassion. This wound, the feeling of not being seen, of not being understood, of carrying weights that are not yours, can be the soil where true compassion sprouts. Not sentimental compassion, but a silent presence, capable of welcoming others' pain without judgment, because it already knows its own pain. But there's a risk. If you don't perceive the value of your wound, it can become a well of resentment, a dark place where pain echoes endlessly. When you recognize this wound as an opening point, a passage to something greater, it transforms. You stop being just someone who suffers and become someone who understands, feels deeply, and looks at others without the veil of appearances. The question is, can you look at your wound without rejecting it? Could you welcome it as part of yourself, and perhaps even as an invitation? What might it want to teach you about the world and about yourself? There is a moment when the pain of sensitivity becomes so intense, so difficult to carry alone, that you begin to ask yourself, what if I fit in? What if I pretended not to feel so much? Maybe then everything would be easier. And almost without realizing it, you begin to mold yourself. Your words become more contained, your expressions more careful, your intensity more diluted. You begin to laugh at jokes you don't find funny, to agree with ideas that don't echo in your heart, to say it's okay, when in fact it's not. And what happens? Gradually, you distance yourself from yourself. The flame that burned inside, that silent light that made you see what others didn't see, that connected you to the invisible, that made you be who you are, begins to fade. Because to survive, you try to be as the world wants. Less sensitive, less deep, less too much. And that's where the danger lies. By trying to fit in, you lose what is most precious in yourself. Jung said that life's true tragedy is not failure, but the loss of self. When you extinguish your inner light to please others, to protect yourself, to avoid the weight of being different, you become a copy. And the world is already full of copies. What the world needs is not more empty voices, but those who listen to what no one listens to, who feel what no one feels, who have the courage to be whole, even if that means being misunderstood. But it's easy to forget this, isn't it? When pain tightens, when loneliness weighs, when you realize you're always on the margin, the temptation to give up on yourself is great. You begin to say, maybe I really am too sensitive. Maybe I should stop feeling so much. And thus, little by little, you abandon who you are without realizing it. The question that remains is it worth extinguishing your flame to fit in? Isn't the cost of belonging to a superficial world, in fact, the loss of your deepest essence? Perhaps the pain of sensitivity is a high price, but the price of losing yourself is much higher. Perhaps, after trying so hard to be seen, after hurting yourself so much in frustrated attempts to be understood, you have felt the desire to disappear. Not physically, but symbolically. Silence your voice, hide your brightness, pretend you don't feel so much. It's understandable. When the world insists on not seeing you, the tendency is to believe that the problem lies in you, that your intensity is too much, that your sensitivity is an error to be corrected. But what if, instead of seeking to be seen by the world, the first step were to become visible to yourself? There exists a blindness that is born from pain. You feel so much, but begin to lose sight of who you really are. Sensitivity, without welcoming, becomes a labyrinth where you confuse yourself with others' feelings, with others' desires, with external expectations. It's like being a lit candle in the middle of a strong wind, trying to protect your flame while everything around blows to extinguish it. But there's a decision that can transform everything. Deciding not to abandon yourself. Becoming visible to yourself is looking at your sensitivity not as a problem, but as an essential part of who you are. It's honoring your pain, recognizing your intensity, validating your tears. It's understanding that what you feel doesn't need permission to exist. It's already real because it pulses in you. Being seen by yourself is a profound act of love. It's sitting in silence with yourself, listening to what your soul wants to say, welcoming your fragilities without rushing to fix them. It's saying to yourself, I see myself. I honor what I feel. I accept who I am, even when the world doesn't understand. Jung said, individuation is the process of becoming whole. And this begins when you stop waiting to be understood and begin to understand yourself. When you stop seeking external approval and begin to recognize the silent value of your own essence. The question is, are you willing to make this pact with yourself? Are you ready to say with firmness, even in the midst of pain, I will not abandon myself? And when this commitment begins to be born, a practical question arises. How to transform this silent burden into something that nourishes instead of exhausting? How to make pain, which so often makes you feel invisible, a source of silent strength. Jung taught us, the path of becoming whole doesn't happen only in thinking or feeling, but also in doing. It's necessary to create spaces to sustain the inner flame. One of the simplest and most profound practices is writing. Not for others, but for yourself. Putting on paper what you feel, without censorship, without fear of seeming too much. Writing is opening a window inside yourself. What was before an amorphous weight transforms into nuances, images, meanings. Another powerful practice is walking. Not necessarily to arrive somewhere, but to let the body move while the mind quiets. It's in unhurried walks that insights arrive. The sound of leaves, the smell of earth, the touch of wind. Everything transforms into living symbols that converse with the soul. Studying symbols, from tarot, from alchemical images, from the Red Book, can also be a balm. Not to seek ready answers, but to connect with mystery. By observing images, you realize that your pain is not just personal. It's part of something greater, a a collective, ancestral human process. And there's the most forgotten practice, and perhaps the most transformative: stopping. Stopping to feel, stopping to listen, stopping to simply be. In silence, what seemed unbearable begins to transform. It's as if the alchemical fire needed space to act, and only in non-doing does transformation happen. These practices won't erase your sensitivity, and they shouldn't. The objective is not to stop feeling, but to learn to feel in a way that doesn't drown you. It's transforming burden into gold, allowing pain to become wisdom, intensity to transform into clarity, silence to become a sacred space. The question that remains is, are you willing to experiment with these practices, not as magical solutions, but as seeds that, with time, can bloom in the fertile soil of your soul? There is something mysterious in the fact that the more you feel, the more invisible you seem to become. The world, trapped in haste, appearances, noises, has no eyes for what is subtle. And however, it's the invisible, what is not seen, what is not measured, what is not named, that often matters most. Jung said, "The invisible governs the visible." It's what lies behind unspoken words, hidden tears, interrupted gestures. It's the field where symbols, archetypes, collective images that shape our experience without us realizing live. Perhaps your sensitivity is exactly that, an antenna for the sacred hidden in common life. While many live in repetition, you feel the weight of small things: someone's tired sigh, the gaze loaded with pain, the beauty of a solitary flower on asphalt. This is not just emotion, it's spiritual perception. And like all spiritual perception, it carries a silent calling: being guardian of the invisible, someone who, even without being seen, sustains what cannot be said. The pain of being invisible, then, is not just a burden. It's an invitation to see the world with more attentive eyes, to hear what lies behind the noise, to become intimate with mystery. When you welcome this invisibility as part of the process, it stops being exile and becomes temple. The silence, which before seemed empty, becomes a fertile space where the invisible flourishes. You realize then that you don't need to be validated to be valuable, that the world may not see what you feel, but that doesn't make your experience less real. The invisible is sacred because that's where essence dwells: the love that is not spoken, the pain that is not expressed, the meaning that is not explained. Can you accept this invisibility not as punishment, but as initiation? Could you perceive that by feeling deeply you touch the sacred, and that even without being seen, you are connected to what really matters? If you have come this far, perhaps something inside you has begun to move, silently. Perhaps you are realizing that your sensitivity, this fragile flame that so often seemed like a weight, is, in fact, a calling. A whispered invitation to the alchemy of the soul, transforming pain into gold, loneliness into inner company, intensity into clarity, invisibility into silent strength. Being sensitive is not being weak. It's being brave enough to feel what the world avoids, to see what many don't want to see, to touch what hurts, even without guarantees of being understood. It's being, deep down, an alchemist of one's own life. Someone who, even burning inside, chooses to remain, learn, transform. Perhaps you will never be fully understood by the world, and that's okay. Perhaps your greatest mission is not to be seen, but to see. Not to be heard, but to hear. Not to be accepted, but to accept. When you become visible to yourself, when you honor your pain and your light with the same respect, something transforms. The world out there may continue blind, but your inner world becomes a fertile, alive, luminous space. And that's why I want to make you an invitation. If this text touched your heart, if you felt that it spoke directly to you, I have prepared something special: the ebook Alchemy and Archetypes. In it, I share simple and symbolic practices to transform your sensitivity into strength, your pain into meaning, your silence into sacred space. They are exercises inspired by Jung's psychology, alchemy, and ancient spiritual traditions, adapted for the real world, for your real world. If you feel that this calling is for you, click the link in the first pinned comment. And if this content made sense, if it illuminated a part of you that was forgotten, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share with those you feel need to be seen. You are not alone.